In the hush that followed the battle, a gentle wind whispered through the trees by the lake. The Avengers stood gathered in somber silence, their heads bowed around a wreath floating on the water's surface. Evening sunlight scattered across the gentle ripples, and in that golden glow, Tony Stark was being laid to rest. There, amidst the mourning heroes, one figure stood slightly apart from the rest. Dr. Stephen Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme, a man burdened by knowledge unspoken. He watched the wreath drift slowly away, its white flowers trembling with each subtle wave, and his cape fluttered softly at his back. To an outside observer, Strange's expression might have seemed merely sorrowful, perhaps reflecting on the loss of a comrade. But beneath the sorrow etched on his sharp features lay a deep well of secrecy and contemplation. Strange's fingers tightened ever so slightly around the eye of Agamotto pendant he still wore, though its green time-stone was long gone. As if by habit he sought comfort in its absent power. His mind was not on the ceremony alone, but on the delicate balance of fate and choice that had led them all here. He remembered the countless futures he had witnessed, each a thread of possibility. He had searched through millions of outcomes for a way to defeat Thanos, the mad Titan, and among them he found only one path to victory. A single, narrow chance. The reality they were now living, where Thanos was dust and the universe restored. In that one victorious future, Tony Stark had sacrificed his life, wielding the Infinity Stones to vanquish the enemy. It was a triumphant moment born from desperate necessity. And yet, as Strange knew all too well, that moment had also been laced with a dark truth known only to him. He cast his gaze down now, watching a stray leaf swirl on the water, remembering how it all began. He thought of the man everyone gathered here believed Tony Stark to be: genius inventor, irreverent hero in gleaming armor, a loving father and husband. The world knew Iron Man as the savior who gave his life to defeat ultimate evil. They celebrated Tony as a selfless hero, but Strange alone questioned, in the privacy of his guarded thoughts, whether the man who died that day was truly Tony Stark at all. A quiet sigh escaped Strange's lips, lost to the rustle of grass and soft sobs around him. The mystery weighed on him heavily. He recalled standing beside Tony in the final battle's climax, the deafening roar of combat fading into a muffled blur in his memory, and how something uncanny flickered in Tony's eyes at the very end. Strange had been reluctant to believe his own suspicions at first. The idea was too outlandish, too horrifying to accept in the heat of crisis. But now, with the battle won and dust settled, he could no longer deny what his instincts and arcane insights had told him. Why did Dr. Strange let Tony Stark die? This unspoken question hummed in the air like an invisible current. It was a paradox. Strange, a master of the mystic arts, could have attempted something, perhaps a spell to strengthen Tony's failing heart in those last moments, or a desperate enchantment to shield him from the lethal surge of Infinity Stone energy. Stephen Strange was not a man to shy away from defying fate. After all, he had once bargained with a cosmic entity to save Earth. And yet on the battlefield he had stood still, holding back tides of water as Tony Stark, gauntlet aglow with all 6 stones, snapped his fingers and burned his life away. Strange had done nothing to intervene. At the time, only he knew it was the sole path to victory. But was that the only reason? Or had Strange allowed Tony's death because of another, more hidden reason known only to him? The truth was as complex as any tapestry of fate, threads of light and shadow weaving together into a single, fateful design. In the days leading up to that final confrontation, Stephen Strange had come to suspect a secret lurking behind Tony's familiar eyes, a secret born of both science and sorcery. A secret that would shake the very foundations of the Avengers' triumph, if ever revealed. Standing at the lakeside farewell, Strange felt the weight of that secret like a stone in his chest. He knew why Tony had to die, why there truly was no other way. He had seen what no one else had seen. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the grieving heroes, Strange turned away from the water and the gathered friends. He could not bear to watch Pepper Potts kneel by the lake's edge, releasing tears into the wind, nor little Morgan Stark clutching a proof-of-concept arc reactor with her father's name engraved. They mourned an idol, a husband, a father, unaware of the deeper loss hidden within the loss. Iron Man was gone, but perhaps Tony Stark had been lost long before that fateful snap. Slowly, Stephen Strange drifted away from the crowd, his footsteps silent on the soft earth. No one stopped him. They were all lost in their own sorrow. The evening air was warm and heavy with the scent of pine and smoke from gently burning lanterns that lit the memorial. Strange walked toward the tree line, where the sounds of mourning fell to a hush and solitude wrapped around him. Here, under the boughs of whispering trees, Strange closed his eyes. The events of the past days swirled in his mind, fragments of battle and conversation, omens and revelations, each piece of the puzzle clicking into place. With measured breaths, the Sorcerer Supreme let his mind slip into reflection, retracing the path that had led them there. The story behind his guarded secret began long before the final battle, perhaps even before Thanos' war, in moments subtle and easily overlooked. It was time to recall those moments, one by one, like stars emerging in a twilight sky, to reveal how Tony Stark's fate became entwined with a name long whispered in the darkest corners of both science and magic. Doom. Victor Von Doom. The very name carried an aura of both menace and tragedy, spoken in hushed tones among those few who knew of him. In the hidden libraries of Kamar-Taj, deep within leather-bound tomes and parchment scrolls, Stephen Strange had once encountered references to this remarkable and dangerous figure. Doom was no mere warlord or petty criminal. He was one of the most brilliant minds on the planet, a scientist whose intellect rivaled even Tony Stark's, and a sorcerer whose command of the mystic arts could challenge the Sorcerer Supreme himself. According to the lore Strange had studied, Victor Von Doom's life was forged in suffering and ambition. Born in the small kingdom of Latveria, a land tucked in the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, Victor was the son of a Romani healer and a mother schooled in witchcraft. Tragedy struck early. His mother, seeking power to protect her family, fell prey to dark forces and lost her life when Victor was but a child. His father perished soon after, fleeing from an unjust ruler's wrath. These hardships became the crucible that formed the young man's iron will. Orphaned and destitute, Victor nurtured twin gifts of genius and sorcery. By the light of tallow candles, he pored over forbidden grimoires and cobbled together ingenious machines from scraps. His brilliance could not remain hidden forever. He earned a coveted place at an American university, where fate intertwined him briefly with another great mind, Reed Richards, though their paths diverged in bitter rivalry. It was there that Doom's arrogance led to a catastrophic experiment, an attempt to peer beyond the veil of reality itself. The explosion left Victor's face scarred, a slight wound by some accounts, but to a man of his pride, it was a devastating mark. In anguish and fury, he donned a mask of cold iron to hide his disfigurement, swearing that none would ever see his face again. Thus was born Dr. Doom, encased in metal, cloaked in emerald, carrying the pain of his past and the weight of his own expectations. Doom vanished from the halls of academia and resurfaced in Latveria, where he used his unmatched technological genius and sorcery to overthrow the corrupt monarch who had once hunted his family. The people of Latveria traded one ruler for another, though Doom saw himself as a benevolent king. In the years that followed, Latveria's borders closed to outsiders. Few knew what transpired behind the veil of that tiny nation, but rumors whispered of an advanced citadel rising above medieval villages, of robotic sentinels enforcing Doom's will, and of strange lights in the night sky as Doom experimented with powers scarcely understood. The world's governments were dimly aware of Latveria's new sovereign, a monarch draped in armor and arrogance. But with crises erupting across the globe and beyond, doom remained a distant specter, a storm cloud on the horizon yet to break. Yet Stephen Strange, in his study of threats to Earth, had taken note. In dusty manuscripts guarded by mystic wards, he read that doom had delved into ancient arcana. There were accounts of doom scouring the Tibetan mountains in search of lost mystic secrets, and whispers that he bargained with demons at the crossroads, even a tale of an encounter with Mephisto, the Lord of Hell, in an attempt to save his mother's soul. Such depths of desperation and daring painted a portrait of a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his ends, whether noble or nefarious. Strange understood then that doom was a man with the potential to shake the foundations of the world if ever unleashed. As fate would have it, the paths of Dr. Strange, Tony Stark, and Victor Von Doom all remained separate until the convergence of extraordinary events set each on a collision course. When Thanos emerged as the ultimate threat, demanding half of all life in the universe, the Avengers and their allies were thrust into a war spanning planets and time. Strange remembered his first meeting with Tony Stark on the streets of New York, when the Sanctum's walls had trembled and the sky itself was marred by the arrival of Thanos' heralds. Tony, clad in his Iron Man armor, had been skeptical and brash upon meeting the wizard in the Crimson Cloak, but mutual respect formed out of necessity. Together, they battled the Black Order and journeyed to the planet Titan, where Stephen's destiny became intertwined with Tony's in ways neither could have imagined. On Titan's ashen soil, beneath a bruised violet sky strewn with unfamiliar stars, Dr. Strange had sat cross-legged and opened his mind to the Time Stone's power. The eye of Agamotto glowed a vibrant green, and time fractured into a tapestry of possibilities before his sight. Millions upon millions of potential futures cascaded through his consciousness. Most were nightmares ending in defeat and darkness. Only one glimmered with hope. One future where Thanos was overcome and life prevailed. Strange seized that fragile thread of possibility and studied its every facet. It was in that state of heightened awareness, drifting between timelines, that he first sensed something anomalous. Among the kaleidoscope of futures, one vision seared itself into Strange's mind: a battle. Earth's mightiest heroes united against Thanos' final onslaught, and at the heart of it, Tony Stark raising his hand not in defense, but in cunning intent. In that fleeting scene, as Strange watched through mystical sight, Tony's form had flickered imperceptibly, a brief distortion as if reality itself shimmered around him. For the barest of moments, the image of Stark's confident face overlaid with another, a Latverian mask of iron, eyes glowing with arcane malevolence. The vision passed in an instant, leaving Strange unsure if it was a true portent or a stress-induced phantom in the torrent of possibilities. He saw Tony, or was it Tony, wrest the Infinity Stones away from Thanos and snap his fingers. He saw the blinding light and heard the thunderous silence that followed. In that singular future, victory was achieved, but at a cost shrouded in ominous uncertainty. When Stephen Strange returned to himself on Titan, gasping as the Time Stone's glow faded from his amulet, he was unsettled. The others on Titan, Tony, Peter Parker, the Guardians, saw only a man exhausted by the strain of viewing so many futures. They could not see the doubt that crept into Strange's heart. Was it a trick of the mind, or had he glimpsed a terrible truth? As Thanos arrived to claim the Time Stone, Strange made his fateful choice. He exchanged the stone for Tony Stark's life, a trade that bewildered Stark in that moment. "Why would you do that?" Tony had asked, breath ragged, his face streaked with sweat and blood. Strange offered no explanation then, only a cryptic promise: "We're in the Endgame now." At the time, Tony likely assumed Strange saved him for the obvious reason that Tony was needed to help undo the snap someday. That was true, but not the whole truth. Strange had acted partly on the hope that his unsettling vision was incomplete or avoidable. If there were any chance to avert the shadow he had seen looming behind Tony's fate, Strange wanted Tony a live try. And so, Tony was spared and sent back to Earth, while Strange disintegrated in Thanos' victorious snap moments later, alongside half of all living beings. In the 5 years that followed, Tony Stark lived a quiet life on the surface. He married Pepper Potts, and together they found a measure of solace raising their young daughter, Morgan. The world was scarred by loss, each day a reminder of the lives that had vanished. Tony, guilt-ridden and weary, left behind the mantle of Iron Man, retreating to a lakeside cabin where the stars at night spoke of both hope and loneliness. By all appearances, this was a time of healing for him, a chance to be a husband and father, to try to move on from the crushing defeat they had suffered. But within Tony's restless mind, there was never truly an escape. His dreams were haunted by dust and failure, and by the question of whether some solution had been within reach and somehow he had missed it. The arc reactor he once wore on his chest, symbol of a life renewed and a reminder of purpose, he had set aside, hanging it in his workshop like an old relic. He swore he was done building suits and fighting wars. Yet, unbeknownst to Tony and the other Avengers, forces were at work elsewhere in the world during those years of aftermath. In Latveria's secluded mountains, Victor Von Doom studied the cosmic upheaval unleashed by Thanos. Doom had survived the snap. Whether by chance or by some protective enchantment, none could say. Half his subjects were not so fortunate. Latveria mourned along with the rest of Earth. But its sovereign's response was not grief alone, it was calculated fury. Doom saw Thanos' act not just as a universal crime, but as a personal affront, an encroachment on Doom's own aspirations to ultimate power. Who was Thanos to arbitrarily wipe out half of Doom's dominion? Who was this alien tyrant compared to Doom, who considered himself Earth's rightful protector and ruler? In the silent halls of Castle Doomstadt, the monarch brooded on how to reverse what had been done, not out of altruism for the lives lost, but to reclaim what was his and prove that no one, not even a Titan, would hold power that Doom could not attain. Through cracked mirrors and humming machines, Doom pored over everything his network could find on Thanos' Infinity Gauntlet. His intelligence sources, tendrils reaching into the remnants of Hydra, rogue scientists and mystics indebted to him, brought reports of 6 stones of unimaginable power. Doom, versed in the legends, knew of these infinity stones: time, space, mind, reality, power, and soul. He knew that together they formed a circuit of omnipotence. But he also learned of their fate, how the Titan succeeded in his grotesque goal and then, incredibly, destroyed the stones themselves to prevent any reversal. Doom's gauntleted fist clenched in rage at that news, the metal of his armor groaning in protest. The ultimate prize had been seemingly wiped from existence just as he became aware of it. Still, Victor Von Doom was nothing if not relentless. If the stones were truly destroyed in his reality, he would find another path. For there were other realities, other times. In his vaults, Doom unearthed a device of his own making, a time platform forged from his study of temporal physics and enriched by stolen schematics from bygone geniuses. With it, he theorized, one could travel to specific moments in the past or even alternate timelines. However, even Doom lacked the final components to pinpoint and safely traverse into those branches of reality where the stones might yet exist. Energy of that magnitude required a unique solution, something akin to the elusive Pym particles developed by Dr. Hank Pym for quantum realm travel. Those particles were as rare as hope in those days. Hank Pym himself had been a victim of the snap, and his lab and resources were lost to uncertainty. So Doom bided his time. He watched. He waited. His diplomatic envoys quietly probed whispers among survivors about the Avengers' plans. And when a spark of possibility finally flickered across the world, when Scott Lang, the Ant-Man, re-emerged from the quantum void and brought with him the idea of a time heist. Doom's spies caught wind. Though details were scarce, Doom's vast intelligence network confirmed unusual activity at the Avengers compound. The remaining Avengers were gathering again, after years of dormancy, clearly plotting something bold. A lesser mind might have dismissed the notion of undoing the past as fantasy, but Doom's own work told him it was feasible. The moment Doom had anticipated was at hand. Someone was going to attempt to reclaim the Infinity Stones from the past. A plan began to form behind Doom's impenetrable mask. A plan both audacious and exceedingly perilous. If the Avengers succeeded in their time travel gambit, the stones would return to the present. That alone could not be permitted to happen without Doom's intervention. Such power would not slip through his grasp a second time. He would have to insert himself into their midst, unseen, to guide the outcome to his favor. But the Avengers would never trust Victor Von Doom. None of them had met him face to face, perhaps, but his reputation, if known at all, would alarm them, and his intents were anything but pure. No, Doom would need to wear a different face, one they trusted, perhaps even loved. He pondered which Avenger he could replace, and one name rose above the rest: Tony Stark. Stark was central to the group's efforts. Doom surmised this from reports that Stark was active again, seen visiting the Avengers compound. More importantly, Tony Stark's intellect and resources were key to making the time travel work. If Doom could usurp Stark's role, he could not only gain access to the Infinity Stones when they were collected, but also sabotage any plan that didn't serve him. Stark also had one vulnerability that Doom could exploit. He often worked alone or in small teams, isolated with his technology, which might give an opportunity for Doom to strike discreetly. Thus, Victor Von Doom laid his plans as spring turned to early summer in that fateful year. He prepared an exquisite disguise, fusing both sorcery and technology. With arcane incantations, he crafted a glamour, a powerful illusion that could cloak him in the exact appearance and voice of Tony Stark. But Doom did not rely on magic alone. His meticulous nature led him to study hours of footage and records of Stark's mannerisms, speech patterns, and even his wit. To further ensure success, Doom engineered a device to interface with Stark's own nanotech, a way to hijack the Iron Man armor and control its functions should it come to a confrontation. Lastly, Doom calibrated a small robotic proxy, not a full Doombot, but a decoy, to take his place in Latveria, issuing routine orders to maintain the illusion that he never left his throne. All was nearly in readiness. Only one obstacle remained. He needed Stark separated from his allies, alone and vulnerable, just for a brief moment. That chance arrived one quiet morning, when Tony Stark slipped away from his lakeside home to rejoin the Avengers and set their daring time heist in motion. The sun had only just begun to climb above the horizon on that quiet morning. Golden fingers of light reached through the trees around Tony's secluded lake house as he prepared to depart. Tony Stark stepped quietly into his daughter's bedroom, careful not to wake the sleeping child. Little Morgan lay curled in her blankets, clutching a plush toy. Tony stood for a moment in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the soft dawn glow. He took a mental picture of this peaceful scene, the gentle rise and fall of Morgan's tiny shoulders as she breathed, the way a stray lock of her brown hair fell over her eyes. In his chest, Tony felt a swell of resolve. Everything he was about to do, he reminded himself, was for her, for the chance that she could grow up in a world made whole again. He padded silently to the bedside and brushed the lock of hair from Morgan's forehead with a careful hand. She stirred but did not wake. "I love you 3000, he whispered barely above a breath, borrowing the sweet phrase she often said to him. In that moment, Tony's heart ached with the weight of potential goodbye. If things went wrong today, this could be the last time he would see his daughter. He forced himself to believe that wouldn't happen. They had a solid plan, and he wasn't going in alone. Still, Tony had lived through enough battles to know the unpredictable price of war. Gently, he placed a small blue and gold star-shaped pendant, a good luck charm he had crafted for Morgan, on the nightstand where she would find it when she awoke. A soft exhale passed through his lips. Then he turned and slipped out of the room. Pepper Potts was waiting for him in the front hall, arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill that seeped in when Tony opened the door. She offered a brave smile, though her eyes glistened with concern. The aroma of fresh coffee hung in the air. Tony had brewed a pot out of habit, even though he couldn't finish his cup, nerves dancing in his stomach. "You'll do great," Pepper said quietly, her voice steady despite everything. Tony gave a small nod and managed a trademark smirk. "Time to save the world again," he quipped softly, trying to lighten the heavy mood. Pepper stepped forward and straightened the collar of Tony's jacket absent-mindedly, a gesture both tender and practical. "Just come back to us," she replied, her composure wavering for a heartbeat as she looked up into his eyes. Tony leaned down and pressed his forehead to Pepper's, closing his eyes. They stayed like that for a few seconds, two souls sharing a silent prayer that this would not be their last parting. He then kissed her, a slow, lingering kiss filled with unsaid worries and fierce hope. "I'll see you soon," Tony whispered. Pepper nodded, letting him go. As he walked out onto the porch, she followed to watch, arms still hugged around herself. The morning mist clung to the ground, swirling around Tony's feet as he approached his sleek electric Audi parked in the gravel drive. He tossed his backpack, loaded with some key tools and the stabilization GPS for the time-space coordinates, onto the passenger seat. Turning back one last time, he saw Pepper standing in the doorway in her robe, a solitary figure framed by the warm light of home. Tony raised a hand in a final wave. Pepper lifted hers in return, a brave smile on her lips that Tony knew was just for him. With a deep breath, Tony Stark tore his gaze away and got into the car. The engine hummed to life, nearly silent. The tires crunched over the gravel as he pulled away, leaving the only life he truly cared about behind for the uncertain road ahead. The drive towards the Avengers compound was calm and mostly deserted at this early hour. Tony's mind cycled through the plan methodically. Meet with Steve and the others, finalize their jump coordinates for each time destination, retrieve the stones with minimal disturbance to the timeline, snap everyone back, return the stones to avoid collateral timelines. It was a far-fetched scheme, but it was the best shot they had. He reminded himself that Strange had seen a future where they won. That thought was a beacon of confidence in the murk of doubt. Still, Tony felt a peculiar unease this morning, an inexplicable prickling at the edges of his consciousness. Chalk it up to jitters, he mused, or the gravity of they were about to attempt. The road wound through stretches of dense woodland. Sunbeams lanced through gaps in the canopy, painting dancing patterns of light and shadow across the pavement. Tony's fingers tapped absently on the steering wheel to the faint tune of music playing on the car stereo, one of his father's old big band favorites. The familiarity of the melody eased his nerves slightly. He allowed himself to imagine the celebration they might have if this all worked out. A gathering of old friends, restored loved ones, perhaps Morgan perched on his shoulder as they watched fireworks of victory. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth at the thought. Suddenly, the car's dashboard flickered. The music warbled and cut out, replaced by static. Tony frowned and gave the console a tap. "Come on, not now," he murmured. At that moment, the car headlights illuminated something on the road ahead. A lone figure standing motionless on the asphalt, cloaked in the morning haze. Tony's heart skipped. He hadn't seen any other vehicles or people for miles. This stretch was remote. He slowed the car, squinting through the windshield. The figure was draped in what looked like a dark green coat or cloak, face obscured by a hood. They stood right in the middle of his lane, unyielding. Tony brought the Audi to a crawl, then a stop about a dozen yards from the stranger. Concern and caution flared within him. Could this be an accident victim? Someone in trouble? Or something more sinister? Memories of ambushes and adversaries flickered through Tony's mind. He had been attacked before in far less isolated places. Gently, he reached into the glove box and pressed a hidden switch, one that activated the portable emergency suit module stored in his car. A bracelet-like device slid out, and Tony slipped it onto his wrist. With a thought, he could summon his nanotech Iron Man suit if necessary. Feeling slightly more secure, he rolled down the window slightly. "Hey, you okay?" Tony called out, trying to keep his tone friendly but authoritative. His voice cut through the still morning air. The figure did not respond or move. Tony felt a bead of sweat form on his temple despite the cool air. Something was off. He turned the car off and pocketed the keys, keeping his other hand near the bracelet trigger. Slowly, he pushed the car door open and stepped out onto the quiet road. Birds chirped obliviously in the distance. Otherwise, an eerie silence reigned. "Sir or ma'am, you need help?" Tony tried again, taking a cautious step forward. The figure raised their head slightly. From beneath the hood, Tony caught the glint of metal reflecting the dawn, a mask concealing the person's face. The visage was expressionless, cast in steel or some alloy, with eye slits that hinted at a red glow within. Tony's stomach tightened. This was no ordinary traveler. The shape of the mask, the hooded cloak, the bearing of the person now became dreadfully familiar to Tony's encyclopedic knowledge of threats. He had seen dossiers and sketches in. Tony grappled for focus, forcing himself to remain calm under attack as he'd done countless times. He gritted his teeth and managed to tap the bracelet on his wrist. Nanoparticles began to spread from the device, flowing over his hand, but doom was already upon him. The cloaked assailant closed the distance with unnerving speed. Doom's metal-clad hand shot out and grasped Tony's forearm, the one wearing the bracelet. Tony gasped as the armored fingers squeezed like a vice, stopping the suit's assembly in its tracks. The half-formed nanotech gauntlet fizzled and retracted under the disruption of dark magic pulsing from Doom's grip. "Stark," came a voice from behind the mask, deep and resonant with a timbre of disdain. "Did you truly think you could outwit fate itself without Doom taking notice?" The way he spoke his own name, Doom, was both regal and wrathful. Tony's heart pounded. He struggled in vain against the supernatural hold pinning him to the car. His mind raced, piecing together the dire situation. Doom knew of their plan for the stones, and he was here, now, a venomous snake in the garden path. Tony mustered a strained grin despite the fear slithering in his chest. "Well, I was hoping to at least make it to breakfast before dealing with any maniacal despots," he quipped through clenched teeth. His trademark humor came automatically, a reflex to mask the panic and to buy time. Tony's free hand inched toward his hip, where a compact sonic taser was clipped. Another personal safeguard he carried. But Doom was frighteningly perceptive. With a casual flick of his wrist, Doom sent another burst of concussive force that knocked the device from Tony's grasp, sending it skittering across the asphalt. "Struggle if you must," Doom hissed, his masked visage inches from Tony's face now. Through the slits in the iron mask, Tony could just make out a pair of eyes, human eyes, cold and calculating, yet alight with a fervor that bordered on zealotry. "It will avail you nothing. You are but a means to an end today." The faint smell of ozone and heated metal wafted from Doom's armor. Tony's mind darted toward any option. Could he stall? Perhaps Friday, his onboard AI, might detect his vital signs spiking and send an alert. But out here, far from help, even if an alert went out, the Avengers wouldn't reach him in time. And Doom likely had jammed signals. The earlier dashboard flicker and static hinted at that. Gasping against the invisible pressure constricting his chest, Tony forced out words between wheezing breaths. "You won't win, Doom. The Avengers, they'll stop you." His voice was strained but resolute. Doom tilted his head slightly, regarding Tony as one might an inconvenienced insect. "The Avengers will never even know I'm there," he replied, his tone almost conversational, which made it all the more chilling. "Do you know what differentiates you and me, Stark?" Tony didn't answer, focusing instead on trying to pry Doom's crushing grip from his arm with his other hand. Doom answered his own question, the slightest hint of a sardonic smile audible in his voice. "You play at heroism with gadgets and charisma, but you lack the will to do what must be done. I, on the other hand, have no such weakness." Before Tony could retort, Doom's free hand, crackling with green mystical energy, rose to Tony's temple. Tony's eyes widened as he sensed a terrible violation of his mind's boundary, like icy fingers dipping into his thoughts. Doom was casting a spell, and Tony's vision blurred at the edges as a wave of dizziness overwhelmed him. He tried to fight it, tried to muster one last surge of the suit. A few nanotech plates formed along his shoulder, but sputtered out. Doom's spell was disrupting the neural link to his technology, and Tony's consciousness itself was slipping. In those final conscious moments, Tony Stark felt a surge of despair and fury. He had come so far, solved time travel, steeled himself for this mission, only to be waylaid by a foe wearing a mask of hatred. Pepper, Morgan, their faces swam in his mind. He wasn't going to be able to save them, not like this. Tony summoned every last ounce of will and spat out a last defiant remark at Doom. "You'll never be Iron Man," he rasped, voice barely audible. Doom's red eyes glinted. "I do not intend to be Iron Man," he said softly. "I intend to be something far greater. Farewell, Stark." With a final pulse of green energy, Tony Stark's world went dark. His body went limp, unconscious or worse, held upright only by Doom's telekinetic grip. The forest lining the road stood silent witness to the swift and dire exchange. A curious deer peered through the trees at the scene, the tall, cloaked figure dragging Tony Stark's inert form off the road and into the brush. Doom knew he had little time before someone at the compound grew concerned at Stark's delay. He worked quickly. From a compartment in his armor, Doom drew a small metallic disc and pressed it to the base of Tony's neck. It latched on with a sharp click. If anyone found Tony later, they would discover that device, one of Doom's inventions, currently emitting a powerful stasis field to keep Stark in deep unconsciousness. Tony would not be awakening anytime soon. Satisfied that Tony was subdued and hidden for the moment, Doom stood and allowed the illusion glamour to wash fully over him. His imposing armored form shimmered and, like a mirage aligning into reality, transformed into the exact likeness of Tony Stark. In an instant, it was Tony's face and figure standing there. The arc reactor faintly visible through the fabric of his shirt, the goatee trimmed just so, the glint of brown eyes that could belong only to Stark. Doom flexed his fingers, and even his hands looked like Tony's, clad now in the casual driving jacket Tony had worn. Only a faint green glow in Tony's eyes, gone in a blink, betrayed the presence of sorcery to any who might have magical sight. He moved swiftly back to the car. Tony's vehicle had spun partially off the road during the scuffle, one wheel in a shallow ditch. Doom, now wearing Stark's face, righted it with a heave, surprising himself momentarily at the raw physical strength his armor's servos granted, strength he had to temper down to Stark's human level for his ruse. He climbed into the driver's seat and checked the dashboard. As expected, his electromagnetic interference had left the electronics in disarray. The digital display was frozen, and the motor had shut off during the struggle. Doom placed Stark's palm, his palm now, against the console, and a small tether of nanites extended from his sleeve into the dashboard. With a quick override command, he restored the vehicle's functions, another trick gleaned from the captured Stark Tech schematics he had studied. The car hummed to life once more. Casting one last glance toward the trees where Stark's real body lay hidden and comatose, Doom narrowed his eyes. "Sleep, Stark," he muttered under his breath, though there was no one conscious to hear. "Enjoy the oblivion you wished for, while I reshape your destiny." Doom eased the Audi back onto the road and continued the drive toward the Avengers compound. As the minutes passed, he forced himself to relax into Stark's persona. His posture shifted from Doom's regal stiffness to Tony's more casual swagger. His mouth curved into a faint approximation of Stark's habitual smirk. In the rearview mirror, he practiced a quick half grin. It was indistinguishable from the real thing. Every detail had to be perfect. Doom was nothing if not a consummate actor when it came to deception. Many in his own court had never seen his face or known his true intentions until too late. Before long, the looming outlines of the Avengers compound came into view. A set of modern buildings near a river, familiar from reconnaissance photos Doom had reviewed. His enhanced vision could make out movement at the front gate, likely security, perhaps even one of the Avengers awaiting Tony. Doom slowed the vehicle and took a deep breath. It was time to play the genius, billionaire, former playboy philanthropist once more. He pulled up to the security checkpoint. A SHIELD agent turned Avengers guard stepped out, giving a customary look. Doom recognized him as a minor acquaintance of Stark's from old days. "Morning, Mr. Stark," the guard said, a bit bleary-eyed but friendly, waving him through. "They're expecting you inside." "Morning, Charlie," Doom replied, matching Tony's easy tone and offering a quick salute of 2 fingers. "Beautiful day for some science, huh?" He rolled the car past the gate, heart pounding at the exchange. The guard suspected nothing. Doom felt a surge of dark satisfaction and relief. Parking the Audi near the main facility, he saw figures emerge to meet him. Steve Rogers and Natasha Romanoff were walking out, likely having spotted his arrival on the surveillance cameras. Steve, in his navy blue jacket and khakis, looked earnest and a touch anxious. Natasha, with her red hair tied back, had an appraising look in her eyes. Behind them, Bruce Banner lingered at the doorway, large but gentle in his demeanor. They had indeed been expecting Tony to arrive with the solution. Doom stepped out of the car, grabbed the metal briefcase he found in the back seat, Tony's case containing his time-space GPS and notes, and lifted a hand in greeting. "Time to shine. Why the long faces?" he called out with a wry smile, striding forward. "Let me guess, someone peed in the quantum tunnel?" Natasha raised an eyebrow, but a hint of a smirk tugged at her lips. Tony's unmistakable brand of humor was a welcome sight. Steve huffed a short, relieved laugh. "Tony," Steve said warmly, "good to see you." There was an unspoken apology and gratitude in Steve's tone. Their reconciliation, begun months ago when Steve came to Tony for help, felt complete in that simple greeting. Steve extended his hand. Doom shifted the briefcase to his left hand and clasped Steve's with his right. He remembered to give a firm, friendly shake. Stark and Rogers had had their differences, but they were brothers in arms again. As they shook, Steve's keen eyes searched Tony's face. If there was anything at all out of place in that moment, a micro-expression, a tension not expected, Steve would have noticed. But Doom's facade was flawless. He met Steve's gaze with the twinkle Tony often had when he was about to one-up expectations. "Good to be seen," Doom replied, releasing Steve's hand. Natasha stepped forward and gave Tony a quick, familial hug. "You came through," she said quietly by his ear. Doom patted her on the back in a friendly manner, channeling Stark's surprisingly sentimental side that emerged in recent years. "Was there ever a doubt?" he answered lightly. Bruce came up, rubbing the back of his neck. The scientist in him was plainly curious. "Tony, we ran some tests, but they didn't exactly. We were getting Scott coming back as a baby," he admitted sheepishly. "Time is messy, big guy, but nothing we can't iron out," Doom said, waving it off as he followed the trio inside. Inside the lounge-turned laboratory, Equipment was strewn about. The improvised quantum tunnel, monitoring screens, suits, and stray coffee cups from long nights of work. Scott Lang himself was there, looking relieved at Tony's arrival. Rocket Raccoon perched on a stool, tinkering with some device, and James Rhodes, in his casual fatigues, gave Tony a nod of camaraderie. Doom found himself in the midst of his enemies, yet they treated him as a friend. It was an odd feeling. He had infiltrated enemy lines before, but never among a band as close-knit as this. Their ease around Tony required him to continually mask his true sentiments. As they peppered him with questions and updated him on their progress, Doom responded in stride, drawing on all of Stark's knowledge he had painstakingly absorbed. Tony's notes and calculations were all in his mind now, as accessible as Doom's own memories. He spoke of adjusting the quantum navigator with an inverted Mobius strip calculation, the solution Tony had found late last night, and of deploying each team to the right coordinates. As he rattled off the plan, he saw Bruce's face light up in comprehension and admiration, and Scott's in bewilderment at the jargon, all exactly as Tony would expect. Only Natasha's subtle, assessing glances and Steve's thoughtful nods gave Doom pause. He noted how these two leaders observed him. Was it suspicion or simply concern for the mission? Regardless, he resolved to give nothing away. The morning and afternoon flew by in a haze of preparation. Doom worked alongside Bruce to calibrate the quantum tunnel and the time-space GPS devices. He had to navigate moments where Tony's personal touch was required. A shared joke with Rhodey about an old Air Force bet, a small word of encouragement to Scott about seeing his daughter again, a commiserating nod to Thor, who arrived later brooding and disheveled, assuring him that they had a plan. Each interaction was an exercise in performance, and each time Doom succeeded, he felt a mixture of pride and a strange hollowness. These people genuinely cared for Stark. To them, he was family. Steeping himself in their camaraderie was at once a tool and a peculiar sting, a reminder of the kind of loyalty Victor Von Doom had rarely ever inspired in others. But he pushed such thoughts aside. Sentiment had no place in his endgame. Finally, the teams were suited up, and the platform hummed with cosmic energy. The Avengers, past and present, gathered for the time heist. Steve, Tony, Doom, Bruce, in his new half-Hulk, half-human form, Scott Lang, Rocket, Nebula, Clint Barton, who had returned grim and hopeful at the chance to save his family, and Natasha. Thor, Rhodey, and the rest, each had their target and time. Steve gave a brief, rousing speech reminding everyone of their mission and what was at stake. Doom found himself standing shoulder to shoulder with them as Steve declared, "This is the fight of our lives, and we're going to win, whatever it takes." Those words resonated in the hangar. Each person present was steeling themselves for a journey into the unknown. Doom felt a surge of anticipation. Whatever it takes. Yes, he thought, but if only you knew what I am willing to do. He clutched the case holding his own return GPS and the device that would store the stones. Doom's heart thumped steadily. Soon, the Infinity Stones would be within reach. In a brilliant flash of quantum light, the teams were sent through time. Tony Stark, or rather, Doom in Stark's skin, was whisked away with Steve Rogers, Bruce, and Scott to New York 2012, the site of the Avengers' first great assembly and the Battle of New York. New York City in 2012 was a stark contrast to the ravaged world Doom had left behind in 2023. The city bustled below as he and the others emerged from the quantum portal onto the rooftop of Stark Tower, or rather, what was left of it after the Avengers' climactic battle with Loki and his alien Chitauri army. The air was thick with the aftermath of conflict, smoke curling from damaged buildings, the distant wail of sirens, and the fading shimmer of a wormhole that had closed in the sky. Doom, asked in Tony's form, took a steadying breath. This was a scene he had only read about in reports. Now he stood in it, an interloper in time. Beside him, Steve Rogers adjusted his Captain America uniform, a slightly ill-fitting older version borrowed from the future, and exchanged a knowing nod with Tony, Doom. Bruce, having transformed back to his human self for the stealth of the mission, looked around nervously, while Scott Lang marveled in awe at seeing the iconic Stark Tower in its former glory. They all had roles to play. Steve would secure Loki's scepter, the Mind Stone. Tony and Scott would retrieve the Tesseract, the Space Stone, from the unsuspecting past version of Tony and the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and Bruce was to acquire the Time Stone from the Sanctum, a task he soon left to accomplish separately. Navigating the chaos below, Tony, Doom, infiltrated the lobby disguised in a swarm of evacuees. He saw his own younger self, the Tony of 2012, swagger into the lobby with Thor and the captured Loki in tow, directing a quip at the older S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who approached. Tony watched from behind a pair of dark sunglasses, making sure to keep out of direct line of sight. The plan was already in motion. Future Scott, shrunk to ant size, hitched a ride on 2012 Tony's arc reactor to sabotage him at the key moment. Doom felt a strange doubling as he saw Stark, the real Stark, chatting obliviously, recalling that this man he impersonated had no idea what trials lay ahead in his future. For a fleeting second, Doom wondered if the real Tony Stark could sense the danger stalking him across years. But of course, he did not. Doom steeled himself, focusing on the goal. The past, Tony placed the silver case containing the Tesseract on the floor as he and others argued about Loki's custody. In that moment, future Scott did his part, causing 2012 Tony to go into cardiac distress by yanking a wire in the arc reactor. Past, Tony staggered, and the crowd erupted in gasps. This was the distraction. Present disguised Tony, Doom, swiftly slid into action, weaving through the panicked agents toward the case on the floor. He had nearly reached it when an explosive interruption sent plans awry. There was a smash. The incredible green bulk of 2012's Hulk barreled through a door, angry at being forced to take the stairs. The massive figure plowed straight into future Tony, Doom, sending him and the Tesseract case flying. Doom hit the polished floor hard as the case skittered across the tiles. The illusion held. By all eyes, he was still just Tony Stark stumbling. "Watch it," Doom barked, fully committing to Stark's irritation. But internally, he seethed. A Doombot would never have been so clumsy as that Hulk. Through gritted teeth, he scrambled to his feet, eyes darting for the case. He saw it land near Loki's feet. The bound Asgardian, ever opportunistic, looked from the case to the distracted agents and gave a sly grin. With one swift kick, Loki flipped the case open and grasped the glowing blue cube. "Loki, no!" one of the agents shouted, but it was too late. In a flash of cerulean light, the god of mischief vanished, Tesseract in hand. For a split second, Doom's mind raced in disbelief and fury. The Space Stone had just slipped through his fingers by a capricious twist of fate. He felt a hot sting of frustration. Had he come all this way only to lose one of the key stones to Loki's mischief? But Steve Rogers was already at his side, looking equally alarmed. They had prepared for this possibility. Tony Stark had mentioned a backup plan. They retreated to an alley where Scott rejoined them, breathless and wide-eyed at the development. "That wasn't supposed to happen," Lang lamented, stating the obvious. Steve's jaw clenched, but his eyes were resolute. He turned to Tony. "Doom, do we have enough PIM particles for one more jump?" Doom quickly collected himself. "Yes, we do," he replied, pulling out the slender vials of PIM particles. The team had a limited supply, but Tony had indeed kept a couple of extra for emergencies. "There's another way to get the Space Stone," he continued, "and a source for more particles." Steve's face registered understanding of the unspoken idea. The two men locked eyes, soldier and scientist, both prepared for sacrifice. "You're talking about going back to the 1970s, aren't you?" Steve said quietly. Tony, Doom, nodded. April 1970, Camp Lehigh, New Jersey, Shield Base. He spoke crisply. My father's time. And Hank Pym's. The Tesseract and Pym particles, both in one place. Scott blinked in astonishment at the plan, a heist within a heist. You guys have a lot of backup plans, he murmured, half impressed and half overwhelmed. There was no time to waste. Steve placed a reassuring hand on Scott's shoulder. Take these and get back to the others, he instructed, handing Scott the remaining particles needed for his return to 2023. Tell them we might be a little late. Scott nodded, understanding that his part here was done, and after wishing them luck, vanished into the quantum portal home. Doom and Steve adjusted their gizmos for the new date and location. You sure about this? Steve asked, a flicker of concern crossing his face as he looked at who he believed to be Tony Stark. You said it yourself, whatever it takes, Doom answered firmly, echoing the rallying cry. Steve gave a tight smile of agreement. In truth, Doom felt a flare of impatience. He would not be denied the stones. If it took diving further back into the river of time, so be it. They triggered their quantum devices, and in a blink, the skyline of New York gave way to a rural military compound of yesteryear. Warm spring air greeted them as they materialized behind a storage shed in 1970. The SHIELD training base stretched out before them, neat rows of barracks and offices, flags fluttering on parade grounds. It was quiet, early morning, nearly deserted. They had arrived undetected. Moving swiftly, Steve and Tony, Doom, split up to cover their objectives. Steve went in search of Dr. Pym's lab to procure more Pym particles for the return journey, while Tony made his way to the underground vault where the Tesseract was stored. Dressed in a business suit that Doom had cleverly pulled from Tony's stash, he had anticipated blending in with the era's attire. He navigated the hallways with relative ease, using a device to spoof a security badge. The base computers were primitive by his standards, easily bypassed. Within minutes, Doom stood in a secluded archive room housing a tall safe labeled with the SHIELD emblem. Behind that steel door lay the Tesseract. He placed a palm on the cool metal and, glancing to ensure solitude, employed a bit of unorthodox assistance, a whisper of arcane words under his breath. Mystical energy flowed into the safe's locking mechanism, muffling the click as the tumblers aligned. The safe swung open. Inside, bathed in a soft blue glow, was the cosmic cube. Doom felt his chest tighten with excitement as he looked upon the Tesseract. Such a small object, yet it contained an infinity of space. Gingerly, he lifted it free from its cradle. The energy vibrated against his skin through Tony's gloves. For a moment, the temptation surged within him to tap into its power then and there, to absorb its secrets. But he restrained himself. Not yet, he thought. Patience. Tucking the Tesseract into the briefcase he carried, Doom exited the archive. But as fate would have it, another encounter awaited in the corridor outside. One that Tony Stark had never expected to have, and which Doom now had to endure. Howard Stark, Tony's father, rounded the corner abruptly, nearly colliding with Tony. For a split second, Doom's mind raced in disbelief and fury. The Space Stone had just slipped through his fingers by a capricious twist of fate. He felt a hot sting of frustration. Had he come all this way only to lose one of the key stones to Loki's mischief? But Steve Rogers was already at his side, looking equally alarmed. They had prepared for this possibility. Tony Stark had mentioned a backup plan. They retreated to an alley where Scott rejoined them, breathless and wide-eyed at the development. That wasn't supposed to happen, Lang lamented, stating the obvious. Steve's jaw clenched, but his eyes were resolute. He turned to Tony. Doom, do we have enough Pym particles for one more jump? Doom quickly collected himself. Yes, we do, he replied, pulling out the slender vials of Pym particles. The team had a limited supply, but Tony had indeed kept a couple of extra for emergencies. "There's another way to get the space stone," he continued, "and a source for more particles." Steve's face registered understanding of the unspoken idea. The two men locked eyes, soldier and scientist, both prepared for sacrifice. "You're talking about going back to the 1970s, aren't you?" Steve said quietly. Tony, Doom, nodded. "April 1970, Camp Lehigh, New Jersey, Shield Base." He spoke crisply. "My father's time. And Hank Pym's. The Tesseract and Pym particles, both in one place." Scott blinked in astonishment at the plan, a heist within a heist. "You guys have a lot of backup plans," he murmured, half impressed and half overwhelmed. There was no time to waste. Steve placed a reassuring hand on Scott's shoulder. "Take these and get back to the others," he instructed, handing Scott the remaining particles needed for his return to 2023. "Tell them we might be a little late." Scott nodded, understanding that his part here was done, and after wishing them luck, vanished into the quantum portal home. Doom and Steve adjusted their gizmos for the new date and location. "You sure about this?" Steve asked, a flicker of concern crossing his face as he looked at who he believed to be Tony Stark. "You said it yourself, whatever it takes," Doom answered firmly, echoing the rallying cry. Steve gave a tight smile of agreement. In truth, Doom felt a flare of impatience. He would not be denied the stones. If it took diving further back into the river of time, so be it. They triggered their quantum devices, and in a blink, the skyline of New York gave way to a rural military compound of yesteryear. Warm spring air greeted them as they materialized behind a storage shed in 1970. The SHIELD training base stretched out before them, neat rows of barracks and offices, flags fluttering on parade grounds. It was quiet, early morning, nearly deserted. They had arrived undetected. Moving swiftly, Steve and Tony, Doom, split up to cover their objectives. Steve went in search of Dr. Pym's lab to procure more Pym particles for the return journey, while Tony made his way to the underground vault where the Tesseract was stored. Dressed in a business suit that Doom had cleverly pulled from Tony's stash, he had anticipated blending in with the era's attire. He navigated the hallways with relative ease, using a device to spoof a security badge. The base computers were primitive by his standards, easily bypassed. Within minutes, Doom stood in a secluded archive room housing a tall safe labeled with the SHIELD emblem. Behind that steel door lay the Tesseract. He placed a palm on the cool metal and, glancing to ensure solitude, employed a bit of unorthodox assistance, a whisper of arcane words under his breath. Mystical energy flowed into the safe's locking mechanism, muffling the click as the tumblers aligned. The safe swung open. Inside, bathed in a soft blue glow, was the cosmic cube. Doom felt his chest tighten with excitement as he looked upon the Tesseract. Such a small object, yet it contained an infinity of space. Gingerly, he lifted it free from its cradle. The energy vibrated against his skin through Tony's gloves. For a moment, the temptation surged within him to tap into its power then and there, to absorb its secrets. But he restrained himself. Not yet, he thought. Patience. Tucking the Tesseract into the briefcase he carried, Doom exited the archive. But as fate would have it, another encounter awaited in the corridor outside. One that Tony Stark had never expected to have, and which Doom now had to endure. Howard Stark, Tony's father, rounded the corner abruptly, nearly colliding with Tony. The older Stark stepped back, adjusting his tie, and offered a polite apology for the bump. Doom froze, calculating responses. Howard peered at him, a friendly, curious expression forming. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "You work with Colonel Phillips?" he asked, eyeing the stranger's suit. For a split second, Victor Von Doom, hidden behind Tony's face, was at a loss. He recognized Howard Stark from photos. The man was several decades younger than when Doom had last seen images of him. but unmistakable. To impersonate Tony in front of his own father, a father who had no idea he was speaking to a future version of his son, this was an irony almost too great. Part of Doom bristled. He had no interest in sentimental reunions or idle chatter when so much hung in the balance. But to preserve his cover, he had to act the part. Doom cleared his throat and summoned Tony's characteristic grin. Howard Potts, he said, using the surname Tony had jokingly used for himself in case of such an encounter. No relation, he added with a chuckle that masked the truth. Howard extended his hand warmly. Well, Howard, you've got a good name at least. As their hands clasped, Doom had to temper his enhanced strength, giving a firm but normal handshake. Howard's gaze flickered to the briefcase in Howard Potts' grip and the peculiar blue light peeking from its seams. A spark of Howard's renowned curiosity lit in his eyes. Working on something interesting? He asked conversationally. Doom felt a prickle of annoyance. Time was of the essence. But Tony Stark might have lingered, drawn in by the significance of this chance meeting. So Doom carefully played along for a short moment. Just some prototype materials I'm transporting, he said smoothly. Top secret, you know how it is. Howard nodded, seeming to accept that. He sighed, a weary but hopeful sound. Days like these, I feel the world is getting more and more fantastic. I can barely keep up with all the breakthroughs. He smiled self-deprecatingly. But I have to. Got a kid on the way any day now. It's actually why I'm here. Nervous, couldn't sleep, decided to drive down to get some work done and clear my head. Doom's expression remained genial, but inside he stiffened. He realized who that unborn kid was, the very man he was impersonating. Howard was speaking of Tony himself. Howard continued, unaware of the cosmic farce before him. I just hope I can figure out the balance. Being a dad and, well, saving the world with all this. He gestured vaguely at the lab around them. Something in Howard's tone, the earnest vulnerability, made Victor Von Doom unexpectedly uncomfortable. Doom had lost his own parents tragically. He rarely dwelt on such feelings, having sealed them under armor and ambition long ago. To hear Howard's stark voice, hopes and fears about fatherhood tugged at a deeply buried memory of the boy Victor once was, longing for his father's safety and love. Doom suppressed the emotion ruthlessly. You'll do fine, Doom found himself saying, echoing Tony's actual words almost exactly as the true Stark had later recounted them. It was uncanny, as if Tony's spirit nudged Doom's performance to align with history. Your kid will be lucky to have you as a father. The words tasted strange on Doom's tongue, sincere and gentle anathema to Dr. Doom's usual speech. But Howard Stark beamed, visibly encouraged. Thank you, that means a lot, Howard said. Then he glanced at his watch. I should be going. Good luck with your project, Howard. They exchanged a final polite nod, and Howard Stark hurried off, carrying a set of blue plans under his arm. Doom exhaled slowly, alone once more. He had navigated the encounter, but it left him with an unfamiliar twinge. How odd, he thought, that in this charade he had inadvertently provided comfort to the father of the man he was impersonating. The master of lies found himself entangled in the very personal truth of Tony Stark's life. He brushed it aside. Sentimentality was a weakness he could not afford. Rejoining Steve at the rendezvous point, Steve having successfully secured additional PIM particles, Doom offered the briefcase containing the Tesseract. Got what we came for, he said simply. Steve noticed a distant look in Tony's eyes. Everything all right? He asked, concern shading his voice. Doom mustered a tight smile. Yeah, ran into someone I wasn't expecting, but it's fine. Let's get home. Steve nodded, assuming the encounter had perhaps been emotionally taxing for Tony. In silence, they activated their return devices and were whisked away in a swirl of quantum light, leaving 1,970 behind. Back in 2023, at the Avengers compound, one by one the teams returned from their missions. Tony, Doom, and Steve materialized on the platform to the relief of those waiting. Bruce, Thor, and others. They bore the retrieved Space Stone, and Steve carried the Mind Stone as well from New York. But the mood was quickly dampened by devastating news. Natasha Romanoff had not returned. The team gathered by the lakeside after Hulk and Hawkeye's team came back, and Clint's haunted expression and tears spoke the truth that words barely could. Natasha had sacrificed herself on Vormir so that they could obtain the Soul Stone. Doom stood slightly apart as the Avengers mourned their fallen friend. He bowed his head, mimicking Tony's grief-stricken posture, but inside felt an impatient flicker. One less warrior to deal with later, his cold pragmatism whispered. Yet even he was not entirely untouched by the scene. The sorrow around him was palpable, and for a moment he felt a begrudging respect for the woman who gave her life for her cause. Doom, too, understood sacrifice, albeit for far different reasons. There was little time to dwell, for they still had a mission to complete. With solemn determination, the team resumed work. Tony, Doom, and Bruce Banner, with Rocket's engineering help, hastily assembled a new Infinity Gauntlet using Tony's nanotech, a device to harness the stones they had gathered. One by one, they placed the glittering gems into the gauntlet. As each stone clicked in, power, time, space, mind, reality, and at last the soul, an eerie energy hummed through the compound. Even Doom felt the hairs on his borrowed skin stand on end as the primordial forces resonated together. His heart pounded. Here it was, the object of ultimate power, complete and within reach. Thor eyed the gauntlet intensely, volunteering to wield it, desperate to atone for his failures. Bruce gently insisted that he should be the one, given his resilience to gamma radiation. The stones emanated gamma energy. Doom remained quiet, secretly relieved that Thor's emotional state would not be trusted with the snap. He knew Banner would use the stones only to bring back the vanished, nothing more. And that was acceptable, for now. Let them do the dirty work of reversing the snap. Doom's moment would come afterward. They all took cover as Hulk placed the gauntlet on his thick arm. The Avengers braced themselves. Doom's eyes never left the glowing stones. He flexed Tony's right hand subtly, ensuring the nanotech command to transfer the stones to him was primed if needed. Part of him considered snatching the gauntlet right then, but Strange's vision from Titan loomed in his mind. The future had shown that Doom's triumph would come in the midst of battle, not this quiet lab. Stick to the plan, he cautioned himself. With a roar, Hulk snapped his fingers. A surge of power blazed through the building, a blinding light that forced Doom to avert his eyes. Hulk bellowed in agony and collapsed, his arm charred and smoking. The gauntlet clattered to the floor, the task done. Outside, birds began to chirp, a sign that life erased by Thanos had just returned. The others rushed to Hulk's side, but Doom hung back, torn between checking on Banner and the allure of the gauntlet lying unattended for a precious second. He took one step towards it, but fate interrupted again. Overhead, the sky rained fire. Thanos had arrived from the past, alerted by the treachery of his own time-traveling agent, and now his warship unleashed destruction on the compound. The ground shattered beneath Doom's feet as explosions ripped the facility apart. He barely had time to snatch the gauntlet off the floor, instinctively clutching the precious artifact to his chest, before a blast hurled him backward. Walls collapsed, the ceiling caved in, and darkness filled his vision as he was buried under rubble. For a moment, everything was a haze of dust and pain. Doom coughed, mentally assessing injuries. Tony's body was durable for a human, but not invulnerable. Blood trickled from a cut on his brow. Still, he was alive. More importantly, beneath his armored jacket, he still felt the hard shape of the iron gauntlet and its 6 prizes. Miraculously, it remained intact in his grasp. Pushing broken concrete and twisted metal aside, Doom clawed his way out of the debris into open air. The battlefield that greeted him was apocalyptic. The Avengers' compound had been reduced to smoldering ruins and gouged earth. In the distance by the river, Thanos sat regally amid the wreckage, helmet donned, sword planted in the ground, waiting as his outriders and warships massed. The Mad Titan had come to finish his work and claim the stones anew. Doom grimaced, rising to unsteady feet. He slipped the gauntlet onto his own hand under the illusion of Tony's suit. The nanotech responded, reshaping to accommodate it hidden. Smoke and dust swirled around as the surviving Avengers emerged from the rubble one by one. Steve Rogers, battered but unyielding, Thor summoning lightning to his call, and Tony Stark appearing battle-worn yet determined as ever. The three exchanged looks of grim resolve and moved to face Thanos together. What followed was a ferocious clash. Under a bruised sky, Cap, Thor, and Iron Man charged the Titan. Doom fought as Iron Man with all the prowess Stark's suit afforded, firing repulsor beams, weaving through Thanos' brutal strikes. The deception remained. Neither Thanos nor his allies had reason to think Iron Man was anyone other than himself. And indeed, to onlookers, Tony Stark was battling valiantly with his friends. But Doom's mind was only half on the fight. The other half stayed fixated on the Infinity Stones, now literally in his grasp, albeit concealed. He needed an opening, a moment where he could step back and wield the stones for his own ends. Yet Thanos gave no respite. The Titan was a whirlwind of power, countering Thor's thunder with his double-bladed sword, matching Cap's strategic might with sheer force. In one exchange, Thanos knocked Tony aside like a rag doll. Doom crashed through shattered earth and struggled to rise as his HUD flickered with damage warnings. It was in that haze of battle that Stephen Strange returned to the field. The Hulk snap had done its work. Across the universe, those turned to dust were restored, including the Sorcerer. Through a flickering portal conjured by Wong, Strange stepped onto the ravaged plains of the compound's outskirts. Immediately, he conjured the winds of Watum to sweep away some of the choking dust. All around him, golden portals spiraled open, and through them came an army of allies. The Wakandans, the Sorcerers, the Asgardians, the Guardians of the Galaxy, all those who had been lost, now arriving to aid in the final stand. Strange's eyes quickly found the trio battling Thanos ahead. His heart skipped at seeing Tony alive, as expected, given this was the timeline he'd foreseen, but something in his mystic senses caught his attention like a discordant note in a symphony. The aura around Tony Stark was wrong. Strange's eyes narrowed. Even amid the chaos, with troops pouring through portals and the ground shaking with renewed combat, Strange focused his arcane sight. There it was, a faint haze of enchantment clinging to Stark's form, a greenish tinge that no one else would perceive in that frenetic melee. In an instant, all of Strange's lingering suspicions crystallized into certainty. The vision he had seen was real, and now unfolding before him. Tony Stark was not Tony at all, but Doom, wearing a deceiving mantle. Despite the shock that threatened to break his concentration, Strange knew he must maintain composure. The battlefield was not the place to expose the truth. If he confronted Doom now, it could ruin everything. The imposter might unleash the stones recklessly or sow confusion that Thanos would exploit. No, Strange realized, the confrontation would come not by accusation, but by allowing destiny to proceed. The Titan still needed to be defeated, and Doom ironically was still critical to that end. Rejoining the fray, Strange lent his powers where needed. He summoned shimmering shields to protect fallen heroes, opened portals to reposition fighters, and at one crucial moment, he stepped in front of an oncoming blast from Thanos' warship, spinning it into a tornado of water drawn from a nearby creek, saving dozens from disintegration. All the while, his gaze would flicker to Tony whenever possible, tracking the imposter's movements. Doom, as Tony fought on, his frustration mounting. The battlefield had erupted into an all-out war. He dispatched aliens with precision repulsor shots and even teamed momentarily with Rhodey and Peter Parker to keep the gauntlet out of Thanos' hands, all while hiding that the gauntlet he carried was empty, the stones secretly embedded now in his nanotech. When Captain Marvel streaked in from the sky like a blazing comet and shattered Thanos' warship, Doom saw an opening amidst the chaos. Thanos, enraged, hurled his sword at the quantum tunnel van, destroying any chance the Avengers had to remove the stones from play. Then the Titan regained the iron gauntlet that Doom had discarded as a decoy, placing it onto his own hand, unaware it held no stones. As Carol Danvers grappled with Thanos, nearly overpowering him, Doom felt the weight of inevitability. This was the moment Strange had signaled in his vision, the one chance. On the periphery of the battle, Strange sought out Tony. Doom, specifically, through the clash of armies, their eyes met across the field. Strange raised a single finger, silently reminding the imposter of the one path to victory. To everyone else, it looked like the Sorcerer Supreme was signaling Tony that this was the one chance they spoke of on Titan. But in Strange's mind, it was a twofold message. Now is the time. Do what you came to do and meet your fate. Doom saw Strange's gesture and a fierce resolve ignited within him. He believed it a confirmation. The future Strange had seen was at hand. Doom's heart pounded with a mix of triumph and fury. He had the stones merged into his armor. Now he needed but claim their power openly. The mad Titan must fall, and in doing so, Doom would rise. As Captain Marvel struggled against Thanos, Doom dashed forward. Thor and a wounded Steve watched, not comprehending his true intent but trusting Tony's move. In a split second, Doom joined the grapple, appearing to assist in subduing Thanos. Thanos, desperate, had just plucked the Power Stone from the gauntlet to blast Danvers away. Doom seized the opening. With sleight of hand as quick as any stage magician, he touched his armored hand, laden with nanites housing the stones, to the gauntlet in Thanos' grip. The Infinity Stones, recognizing a new command, flowed like jeweled liquid out of the fake gauntlet and onto Doom's right hand, spreading across his armored glove. Thanos' eyes widened in confusion as the stones vanished from his gauntlet. He turned to see them now set in Iron Man's hand, glowing with raw potential. Tony stood before him, battered and determined. In that moment, all fighting around them seemed to still, the air itself holding breath. Doom felt the surge of cosmic energy infuse him, a taste of omnipotence beyond anything he had known. It was overwhelming, electrifying agony. His vision swam with colors of entire galaxies as the power coursed through mortal veins. He trembled, nearly buckling, but sheer will, Victor Von Doom's indomitable will, kept him standing. This was his moment. He forced Tony Stark's face into a final smirk for the audience of foes. Thanos snarled, realization and fear crossing his face. He lunged. "I am inevitable," he growled, attempting to snatch victory back. But Doom wouldn't be denied. Clenching his fist with the stones, he summoned the last ounce of strength in Tony's body. "And I," he declared in a voice that strained to sound like Tony's confident drawl, "am Iron Man." With that iconic proclamation, he snapped his fingers. What followed defied description. A blinding white explosion of light erupted from the stones, a shockwave of power that rippled across the battlefield. Thanos and his legions froze as the energy washed over them, their forms starting to disintegrate into ashen flakes. The Titan had time for one last look of astonished defeat as his body broke apart, scattering to the winds. All around, his vast armies, the Chitauri, the Black Order, the monstrous Leviathans, crumbled to dust, swept away like sand in a cosmic breeze. But the victory came at a grievous price. The power of the stones, enough to unmake armies, was too great for a mortal vessel. Even one as armored and shielded as Tony Stark or as magically fortified as Doom. The nanotech gauntlet fused and melted into Tony's arm, sending tendrils of agonizing energy through his flesh. Doom's illusion flickered under the strain. Inside the armor, his true face contorted in pain. With the deed done, he collapsed to his knees, the stones falling silent and embedding themselves inert once more in the metal of the ruined gauntlet. A stunned silence fell, broken only by the wind and distant rumble of vanishing ships. Slowly, the heroes gathered realized what had happened. Tony Stark had done it. He had sacrificed himself to destroy Thanos and his army. Stephen Strange stood a few yards away, chest heaving with exertion, eyes glowing with sorrow and grim satisfaction. Through his sorcerer's sight, he witnessed more than the others. As Tony knelt on the scorched earth, life ebbing, Strange saw the glamour falter. For just an instant, superimposed on Stark's face, he glimpsed the outline of a scarred Latverian visage, lips drawn back in a final grimace of agony. Strange's spell of revealing, cast subtly at the moment of the snap, ensured that the illusion could not hold under such immense stress. No one else observed this spectral shift. They rushed to their fallen friend's side, hearts breaking. But Strange saw and understood. Doom had fulfilled the destiny Strange needed him to, and in doing so, had sealed his own doom. Pepper Potts arrived first, freed from the wreckage and still clad in her violet rescue armor, ripping off the helmet with trembling hands. Peter Parker was next, stumbling forward with tears already streaming down his face. They gathered around Tony, or the man they knew as Tony, who was slumped against a pile of rubble. The right side of his body was charred terribly, the Iron Man suit in tatters. His gauntleted hand, blackened and smoking, lay limp at his side, the faint glimmer of the Infinity Stones still visible before they began to wink out, one by one, spent. Rhodey came, gently touching Tony's shoulder, eyes full of anguish. Peter fell to his knees, sobbing apology and gratitude in equal measure, calling, "Mr. Stark, please," as the man who was his mentor gazed blankly forward. Pepper, choking back tears, cradled Tony's face in her hands. To her eyes it was her husband's face, paled and unresponsive. She knew time was short. "Tony, look at me," she urged softly. Doom's consciousness flickered behind failing eyes. He could barely register the figures around him. His grand design had succeeded in a way. Thanos was gone, but not by rising triumphantly. Instead, he was dying the death of a hero he never truly was. Through blurry vision, he saw Pepper's face leaning close. In his mind, perhaps Victor Von Doom thought of another woman long lost, his mother, or perhaps of nothing at all but the void closing in. He tried to speak, a final word gurgling in his throat. Pepper saw Tony's lips move and leaned in. To her, it sounded like a strained attempt to say her name, or perhaps to say, "I'm sorry." But Stephen Strange, standing at a slight remove, heard what it really was, a single, whispered syllable. "Doom." Pepper must have assumed he was beyond speech. She mustered a brave smile through her tears, stroking the side of his face. "We're okay," she told him in a voice that wavered with heartbreak. "You can rest now." At those gentle words, Victor Von Doom, in the guise of Tony Stark, let out one last shuddering breath. The light dimmed in his eyes that in his final instant blazed a dull green before fading to brown, and his head slumped to the side. Tony Stark's arc reactor flickered and went dark. It was over. Tony Stark, the image of him, at least, had died a savior. The heroes around bowed their heads in grief and gratitude. Tears flowed freely, from Peter's red eyes, from Thor's as he watched in sorrowful respect, from Steve who stood somberly, saluting the fallen comrade who had completed the mission. Only Doctor Strange held back, his face a mask of complicated emotions as he alone comprehended the full truth. In the days that followed, the world mourned Iron Man as a true hero. A memorial service was held by the lake at Tony and Pepper's home, where a hologram message Tony had recorded played his final hopeful words. None suspected the switch. None doubted the narrative that Tony Stark had willingly given his life to defeat Thanos. Stephen Strange had faced a choice: expose the truth or protect it. He alone could reveal that the man they cremated and honored was in fact one of the greatest villains on Earth, and that Tony's true fate was entwined in a tragedy hidden from all. But Strange saw no benefit in unraveling that secret. The threat of doom had been extinguished on the battlefield, and to shatter the image of Iron Man's noble sacrifice would only inflict pain on those left behind: Pepper, Morgan, the Avengers, and a world that needed to believe in its heroes. Quietly, Strange took it upon himself to investigate the site of Tony's ambush. With a heavy heart, he ventured alone to that woodland road where scorch marks and disturbed earth told of a struggle. There, concealed in an outgrowth of bushes, he found what he dreaded: Tony Stark's real body, cold and lifeless, still wearing the simple jacket and shirt he'd left home in. The stasis device at his neck had long since burned out. It appeared Doom had not bothered with a merciful end. Tony likely perished from the magical trauma inflicted or from being left comatose and untended. Strange knelt beside the fallen genius, a man who had been both friend and stranger to him. In that silent glade, Strange whispered a heartfelt apology that Tony's brilliant light had been smothered by darkness. Using his cloak, Strange gently shrouded Stark's body. With utmost care, he lifted Tony's remains and conjured a portal. In secrecy, he delivered Tony Stark to a peaceful resting place, perhaps even interring him beneath the very lake where the world believed he'd been memorialized. He spoke rites for Tony's soul, calling on the Vishanti to guide the departed to peace. It was all he could do to honor the man whose identity had been usurped. And so, the secret remained safe. At the lakeside funeral, no one noticed that Tony's casket was empty, save Stephen Strange, who stood apart carrying the weight of truth. In the eyes of everyone gathered, Tony Stark was a hero who had saved the universe. That belief would inspire generations to come, a symbol of selflessness and courage. Under the weeping willows by the water, as the funeral concluded, Stephen Strange finally stepped away into the shadows of the trees, which is where our tale first found him. There he lingered, lost in contemplation, the golden hues of sunset filtering through the leaves onto his pensive face. The sorcerer wondered if there had been any other way, any reality where Tony lived and Doom was defeated without that sacrifice. But even the Sorcerer Supreme must accept the limits of a single victorious timeline. In the end, Doctor Strange made peace with his choice. He had let Tony Stark, or rather, the man wearing Tony's face, die because the fate of the universe had demanded it. In doing so, he had also vanquished Victor Von Doom, removing a hidden dagger poised at the world's heart. Two threats ended with one snap. Gathering his cloak about him, the Sorcerer Supreme stepped through a shimmering gateway to the Sanctum Sanctorum, leaving the gentle rustle of the lakeside in his wake. In the deepening twilight, the world was at peace, saved from Thanos, saved from doom, safe to dream of a better tomorrow. As night descended, the tale of why Doctor Strange had allowed Tony Stark to die remained a secret kept in the silent heart of Stephen Strange. A mystery, a victory, and a tragedy interwoven, perhaps whispered only in the farthest corners of the cosmos. Stars came out one by one, their reflections dancing on the lake's surface, as if the universe itself acknowledged the heavy truth and the necessity of its silence. In that stillness, Tony Stark's legacy and Victor Von Doom's shadow both passed into legend, one celebrated in the light, the other swallowed by the dark, leaving behind a world that would remember only the hero. And so the master of the mystic arts stood guard over a truth destined to fade like footprints on a shore, while the world slept soundly, dreaming of the heroes who protected them, never knowing the sacrifice behind that final, fateful act.